Hi, ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Tuesday morning, October the 3rd. We have a very chilly air mass coming into the eastern part of the nation this weekend. It'll follow a strong cold frontal passage at the end of the work week or into the early part of the weekend in the eastern states. And again, it will usher in much cooler air for the upcoming weekend and the early part of next week. And we'll talk a little bit here in today's video about why that cold shot may not be all that brief in nature. First of all, before we get there, we have some very warm and dry weather for the next few days throughout much of the eastern U.S. Strong high pressure is in control and will push to the east off the eastern seaboard for the Wednesday and Thursday time frame, and it remains quite warm, well above normal, places like D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, not only today and tomorrow, but into Thursday as well. Then we start to cool down on Friday and especially into the day on Saturday as that chillier air mass arrives from the north and west. Before we get to the weather maps for the continental U.S., let's take a look at the latest sea surface temperature anomalies and a few areas of interest that we'll certainly continue to monitor over the next few weeks as we get into the latter part of the fall season, and soon we'll be putting out a winter outlook, and much of it will be dependent on the sea surface anomaly temperature pattern. First of all, we've talked about this before. El Nino is certainly a key player, it looks like, in the upcoming winter season of 2023-2024. Here we have above normal sea surface temperatures extending from the west coast of South America all the way into the central part of the equatorial Pacific Ocean. Right now, it's a little bit more above normal, again, a little bit higher relative to the averages in the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean than it is in the central part, but that looks like that may kind of shift a little bit. That axis of the highest relative to normal temperatures may shift from the eastern part of the Pacific Ocean into the central part as we get closer and closer to the winter season. Meanwhile, still quite warmer than normal conditions across the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. And this tells me tropical season in the Atlantic Basin certainly not necessarily over quite yet. Again, we have some very warm, above normal temperatures across the Gulf of Mexico and into the Caribbean Sea. Meanwhile, you can see here a patch of colder than normal conditions in the northwestern part of the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of that is as a result of the passage of tropical systems, hurricanes over the last few weeks that through the process of what we call upwelling, brought some colder waters from underneath all the way up to the surface, and it still exists as we get here into the early part of October with cooler than normal sea surface temperatures in the northwestern Atlantic. Well, let's now get back to the continental U.S., and we'll take a look at the weather pattern not only for the next few days, but perhaps for the next couple of weeks here. Again, we have quite an impressive cold shot coming into the eastern states during the upcoming weekend into the early part of next week. And we'll take a look here at the 500 millibar height anomaly forecast maps by last night's zero-Z run of the GFS, the conventional version of the GFS, just to kind of point out that this cold shot may not be all that brief in nature for the eastern states this weekend into the early part of next week. There are reasons to believe we could have some cooler than normal conditions extending into the middle part of October. First of all, we're starting off here with upper level ridging centered over the Hudson Bay region of Canada, and surface high pressures right in this vicinity here in the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic region. Very nice weather over the next few days for places like D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, much of the Midwest and Great Lakes region as well. Notice a trough over the interior western U.S. Now, we will continue to move forward here rather quickly going into the middle of the week. That ridge in complete control over the eastern part of Canada and much of the eastern U.S. as well. Then we start to see the upper level trough over the northern plains begin to dive to the south and east. This is at the end of the work week here this Friday, and there'll be a strong cold front right in this region as we get into the end of the week here. And by the time we get to the early part of the upcoming weekend, that cold front will clear the east coast. Excuse me, much cooler air will push into the Mid-Atlantic region, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the Northeast, by the early part of the upcoming weekend. Notice this upper level trough, very vigorous upper level trough over the Great Lakes by the early part of the week, and that ridge kind of squeezed away, kind of pushed back up to the northeastern part into eastern Canada. Then we'll see as we go through the upcoming weekend, notice this troughiness dominating the scene in the eastern states, ridge out there across the western U.S. and western part of Canada. But watch the trough tend to kind of reinforce itself over the upcoming several days going into the month of October. Here we are, you see kind of rotated around, trough kind of sitting in place here. Now this is a week from right now, next Tuesday, the 10th of October. And we'll go out even farther in time and just sits and spins there all the way into the latter part of next week. We're now all the way into right here, the end of next week, October 13th, almost the middle part of October here, and still upper level trough sitting over the mid-Atlantic region and much of the eastern U.S. As a result, will not only become cooler than normal this weekend in the early part of next week, but that cooler than normal air may dominate the scene well into next week, maybe all the way into the middle part of the month of October. Well, let's see how that translates to the temperature pattern. What we're looking at here are 850 millibar temperature anomalies, 850 millibars being a couple thousand feet off the surface. Now, I tend to use 850 millibar temperature anomalies as opposed to surface temperature anomalies because it just generally are a much smoother field to look at, and they correspond very well with the surface temperature anomalies. So I don't think we're losing much here by going a couple thousand feet off the ground level. Starting off much above normal conditions over the southern part of Canada, into the Great Lakes, the Midwest, and certainly into the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. We'll also have high temperatures in the lower 80s for the most part along the I-95 corridor region. That is above normal for this time of the year. We'll move forward through the week here. Here we are now, Wednesday, and then into Thursday, and here comes that shot of colder air. By the time we get to Friday, a strong cold frontal system right here delineating the colder than normal air to the west and the still warmer than normal air to the north and east, and that cold shot just plunges far to the south and east, all the way into the southeastern states, by the way, by the time we get to the second half of the upcoming weekend. This is the Sunday morning forecast map of 850 millibar temperature anomalies. While we may be 80 to 85 degrees for afternoon highs today, tomorrow, maybe even Thursday, DC, Philadelphia, New York City will be much closer to that 60-degree mark by the time we get to Sunday afternoon for Sunday afternoon high temperatures. And again, much of the eastern half of the nation below normal by the second half of the upcoming weekend, and that extends all the way down into the Gulf of Mexico region. Then we move forward here, and we'll go rather quickly here. Remember, we talked about that kind of a rotating, reinforcing upper level trough, and here we are now well into next week, all the way into the end of next week here. We're at October 13th, the end of next week. Still, some below normal conditions continue Midwest, Mid-Atlantic region as a result of that reinforcing upper level trough over the eastern states. So it looks like the kind of a cooler pattern sets up this weekend and may continue all the way into at least the middle part of October. Well, now let's wrap up with the surface forecast maps from last night's conventional 0Z model run of the GFS. High pressure in complete control here over the eastern state, and it will stay in complete control over the next few days. Let's move forward here. We'll see it tends to shift to the east, maybe a little bit more wind on Wednesday afternoon and Thursday afternoon in places like DC, Philadelphia, New York City, out of the southwest on the backside of that high pressure that shifts off the coast. And then here we go with the incoming cooler than normal air mass. This is now Friday morning. And notice this dashed blue line here. We will refer to this 540 line quite a bit over the next few months as we go into the upcoming winter season. The dashed lines here represent what we call thickness levels between the surface and the middle part of the atmosphere. Generally, the lower the thickness, the lower the overall temperature in that layer between the surface and the 500 millibar, or the middle part of the atmosphere. And this 540 line is kind of an important line because roughly it represents the rain snow line in an upcoming winter situation where there's rain or snow possibility. That 540 line tends to be roughly correlated with the rain snow line. So again, we will refer to that particular thickness level, 540, quite often over the upcoming several months. But bottom line here is this is telling us this is quite a chilly air mass, and the blue, of course, represents snow. And we, needless to say, will see increasing amounts of blue on these forecast maps over the next several months here. Now, we'll move forward here. The frontal system, not necessarily all that wet. Certainly, there will be some shower activity, maybe embedded thunderstorms as well. At the end of the work week, this is the late Friday night, Saturday morning forecast map, and here comes that cold front charging to the east by Saturday morning. It looks like the full brunt of that cooler air mass will be felt by the time we get to Sunday in the eastern U.S., certainly along the East Coast and the I-95 corridor region. And here we go all the way out to Sunday morning. And that 540 thickness line right here over the southeastern part of Pennsylvania, telling us we may see low temperatures in the 40s by the end of the weekend and the early part of next week. Again, quite a chilly air mass moves in over the upcoming weekend into mid-Atlantic, northeast U.S. And as we saw a moment or two ago, it looks like that cooler than normal pattern may hang on, not necessarily every single day, but much of the time going into the middle part of October. That's it for now. For ArcfieldWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.